Hey, welcome back to the Leaders Edge podcast, where we highlight leaders from every industry. And today we're talking to DJ Moore from Erosion Construction Solutions. He's in Northwest Indiana. DJ, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell me about your business. What is Erosion Construction Solutions?
We manufacture and provide erosion and sediment control solutions, and we provide stormwater pollution prevention, plan implementation, maintenance, and removal. So a lot of people don't even know what that is, but as far as construction goes, it's the first thing on and the last thing off. Nationally, job sites are required to have a SWPP plan, which is that stormwater pollution prevention plan, which basically makes sure that any dirt that's on the site stays on the site because globally the number one pollutant of fresh drinking water is dirt, and that's something a lot of people don't think about. So while it's still a small phase of construction, it's extremely important for our drinking water, which everyone knows we need. So
Yeah, I think it may be a little bit more important than that too, from a construction standpoint. And I grew up as an army engineer, so I did a lot of construction projects all around the world. There were places that did not care about their stormwater
yes,
drainage; they did not
and
care about that, and yet we still made efforts to not make things worse than when we found them. But here in the states, obviously, and most of the Western world, the runoff from your construction sites is not just a good idea; it's the law. And
yeah,
so having great filtration systems to keep the junk out of our water is not just a good idea for our friends and family. It's also a great idea to stay out of trouble with
yes,
regulatory agencies.
that too. So.
So to me, it's really kind of risk assessment. How much are you willing to risk when you're doing a construction project in an area that's got runoff, and basically that's everywhere. Great. So what do you think is kind of the biggest problem that you have in your industry?
Oh, um, you kind of just touched on it. I'd say overall for the whole country is inconsistency in enforcement.
Oh yeah.
So where it's a phase of construction that's legislated at every state of or every level of government, federal, state, county, city. Um, you don't see it consistently across the board. So when it gets down to that town level, you might not have an inspector who cares. You'll have someone in one town who cares deeply and understands, and then the next town over, you have someone who doesn't care at all. And having that inconsistency across the board nationally is a struggle for everybody because there's a lot of responsible companies out there and they'll do it regardless. Typically, those are large, national or multinational companies that understand that risk assessment and want to do the right thing. And then the reality is, we work with a lot of small businesses too, and profit is at the forefront of everyone's mind. And if you have an inspector that's not going to make you do anything, and you could save some dollars, it's unfortunately a necessary evil that sometimes that's a cost cutting measure. And not just erosion control. I'm sure there's a lot with that, but I'd like to think that nobody wants to do that, but at the same time, without that enforcement there, I mean, you see where there's enforcement, they do it, and where there's not, sometimes they don't. So I'd say that's the biggest struggle for the industry overall.
I think that's really interesting that how a government agency or government agencies uh, behave and how they enforce their rules affects your sales in a significant way.
Yeah, and I'm always leery with that too because the last thing I want is the government to tell me what to do. So
Right.
that's always a struggle for me as well. But we truly do believe and it's true that what we're doing is actually good for the environment and it's good legislation. I think there's just a bad rap, especially in the environmental space, where there is a lot of bad legislation out there that is just legislation to legislate, and we kind of get grouped in with a lot of that stuff where we need clean drinking water, but you've heard Donald Trump talk about all of the hoops he's had to jump through in the past for some of his building approvals, and that happens to everybody nationally. And I think a lot of that bad legislation gives the good legislation a bad name, so that's very tough. But like you said, yeah, sometimes thankfully at our level, it doesn't change too much. So we just kind of hope for a good inspector in certain towns over others. So
Yeah, and I think you're right that there are a lot of good companies out there, big ones and small ones, that recognize the importance of controlling the runoff and making sure that we're not adversely affecting the environment. But there are others that simply don't care, and if like there's a lot of people who drive 90 in a 65-mile-an-hour zone because they know the cops aren't enforcing that rule. In that case, maybe they're making the roads a little bit more dangerous or not, depending on who else is out there. But all of the time runoff is important.
Yeah.
And so it's not a victimless crime to not control your runoff. Right?
Yeah. It's one of those things, if you don't see it, the immediate effect, because not a lot of people are turning on their faucet and there's no drinking water. So I mean that's human nature, is you don't typically change until there's a pain that you can no longer tolerate.
Right.
And because we live in where we live, people don't see that pain at the forefront, so they're not going to be at the forefront of doing something about it. So
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's human nature. I think we have a difficult time. We want short cause and effects linkages,
yep.
and when there's a lag time between a cause and an effect, we just lose sight of it. And
Especially
drinking
when your
water.
P&L
Yeah.
is an immediate
Oh yeah.
pain point. So I get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've got clients all over the place, or are you mostly regional, or is this something
Yeah, so
that
we
you?
provide, like I said in the beginning, we provide products and services. So our products we ship nationally, to large constructors, large distributors. Our services are more regional, so we do send crews to travel for bigger jobs, but yeah, we're mostly in the Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. Uh, we stretch into Missouri, some Ohio for installation work. So.
Very cool. How do you reach those clients? I mean, I was going to ask you who your ideal clients are, but obviously they're people that are doing construction projects.
Yeah, and that's part of it. The difficulty too is erosion control isn't something that people think about at the forefront of construction. So different different people handle it different ways. So sometimes the general contractor will handle it all. Sometimes they'll hand it off to the excavator. Sometimes they'll hand it off to the landscaper. Sometimes they'll hand it off to someone like us. So our sales process is somewhat difficult in that sense. Is we have to figure out who to even talk to, or how they handle it. So we could go to a general contractor and say, how do you handle this? Well, I hand it to this guy. And then the excavator might say, well, I hand it to this guy. So that's an extra step in a less than straightforward sales process that we have to figure out, is how do you even handle this? Because a lot of people don't even want to think about it. Which is where we really find our bread and butter, especially on the install side, is we mitigate headaches for people, because erosion control, it's typically less than 1% of your overall construction budget. You don't want to spend time thinking about that. You don't want to spend time talking to that person because the return isn't great. But when you get work stoppages, then it's a huge issue. So our whole thing is, hey, hand it to us. You don't have to worry about it the whole time, and we'll make sure it's a done deal. So that's how we approach it typically. But target customers are, we usually start with the general contractor, and we kind of see who he hands it off to from there. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for me, who I've been in a lot of different construction worlds in my career in the military and afterwards, that's one headache I don't really want. And if I could just push an easy button and say, listen, I don't have to worry about an
yeah,
environmental or regulatory agency coming in and giving me a hard time about it. I just call DJ and he makes sure I don't get in trouble. Uh,
that's our ideal customer. Somebody who doesn't want the headache.
well,
So
it's mostly because I'm pretty lazy and I don't want to have to deal with that if I can get rid of it. If I can outsource or delegate or
no,
automate
and
something.
don't tell yourself that, because a book that changed my life is Great CEOs Are Lazy. Because I used to think I was lazy too, and all it means is you look for efficiencies and you look for the maximum return on minimal effort.
Yeah,
So
I firmly believe that. I have a book in draft called "Be More Lazy." It's a leadership book about how to get things done by, with, and through other people, and maximize your value as a strategic thinker.
story of my life.
I love it. I love it. So, where do you see your industry going in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
You know, I would like to hope that nothing's ever going to go backwards on drinking water. I'd like to think that there's going to be a better focus on good legislation versus bad legislation. So what I would love to see is an increase in enforcement for the good of everybody, um, while also kind of tossing out some of these garbage regulations that are out there from an environmental standpoint. So I would love to say that that's the direction it's going to go. You know, you never know by any means how anything's going to go. I'd like to think that that's the direction it's going to go, and that's I yeah that's
I admire your optimism, DJ. We don't have a good track record in the United States of taking laws off the books. We build laws and regulations for the time, and then we just stick with them out of habit. And for some reason, we don't repeal those laws. But it'll be
we'll
interesting to
see.
see over the next couple of years because there are some reformists that are coming into office at this point. So,
I'd
uh,
say the chances are better than we've had in a long time. So
yeah, as long as we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater there, because as you pointed out, there are some great regulations out there that
that's
matter, and they are making an impact for drinking water for everybody.
I almost use that exact phrase. So
Awesome. Hey, so I'm guessing that as you built this company, that you probably learned a lot along the way. And if you're like most of us, you learned a little bit more from your failures than you have from your successes. Would you mind sharing a lesson you learned the hard way?
yeah, so when I left my full time job to come in, I mean, there's only so much you can know before you get in, and I had this pie in the sky vision of I was going to be a business owner, I was going to be an entrepreneur, I was going to make my own schedule, I was going to have all this freedom, and it was going to be just awesome. It was going to be great all the time. So I was commuting back and forth to Chicago, an hour and a half each way. So anything was better than being in the car for 3 hours. Um, and I immediately came in and realized quickly that like we had every small business problem you could possibly have, with the exception of revenue, which is a good one not to have. But everything else, um, quickly realized that it it was falling apart quickly unless we did something. And for a couple months, I went back and forth if I wanted to keep doing this. And my dad's one of my mentors, and I went to talk to him and just kind of commiserate because a lot of the problems when they came in, like I hadn't created them directly, and as a leader, that's a hard thing to rectify sometimes because as a leader, you want to own everything because ultimately you do own everything. Uh, at the same time, I was less than 2 months in. All this stuff was in place before I came in. So I was really struggling to reconcile those two things. And went to my dad and I said, none of this is my fault. This sucks. Our customers aren't paying us. Our employees don't show up to work. They don't do what they're told. Me and my partners were yelling at each other all the time. And our vendors are treating us like crap because we couldn't pay them because we weren't getting paid. And and I'm like, this sucks. I might just go back to my old job. And my dad was like, and I thought he was gonna pat me on the back and say, no, it'll be fine. Like we'll get through this. And he was like, then go do it. Then leave because it's not. This isn't cut out. Like not everyone's cut out for this. And that doesn't make you a bad person. That's fine. But like you're doing yourself and your partners and your employees a disservice if you stay any longer. So if you're gonna go, go. And I got super mad and I got motivated by people telling me I can't do things typically. So at first it was the rage of like, oh, I'm going to figure this out. Um, and I got a professional coach who kind of I would just pour my heart out to her, and I couldn't afford her, and I knew I needed to make a change because I was either going to spiral and go crazy or leave, and I didn't know if I'd get this opportunity again. So she taught me, you know, tackling one thing at a time, is not thinking you can fix everything at once. 80/20 rule, going for the biggest problem first, and then having confidence in that flywheel that like you can't fix everything at once. And really, the biggest takeaway I think that I've realized over the years is that what really sets people apart from just being a cog in the wheel and an employee versus the effective employees or the entrepreneurs or the leaders are how you handle the problems that aren't your fault and how you deal with them because the problems are there regardless. And I talk at Purdue University, I talk to a lot of high schools locally, and I tell everybody like, hey, the only reason you're getting hired as an employee is to solve a problem for somebody, and a lot of the problems aren't going to be your fault. And a lot of people just say, well, I don't know what to do with this and hand it up the ladder. If you get really good at solving problems that aren't your fault effectively without complaining about it and just being that person that's a go-to, that's that difference in that person who, and that's not even just work, like that's life too. If you can just put your head down and fix problems that aren't your fault, then you're gonna be a much more effective. You're gonna be you're a much better person to be around. So that's probably the biggest.
takeaway I've taken overall.
Man, what a valuable lesson to learn, and I applaud you for getting a coach. That's my other business is leadership coaching, and I also have a construction business. But the leadership coaching piece of this is all about mindset, right? It's
Yep.
all about owning a problem, whether or not it's your fault. It's exactly as you said. It's like it's not your fault; it's just your responsibility.
I think early on, those weren't my fault, but as the longer you're in the business, everything is ultimately your fault.
That's right.
Like and,
Yeah.
and we've had a lot of issues over the years that pop up, and I'm like, my first reaction is, this isn't my fault. And then, because I have my private reaction where I'm not going to share that with everybody because that's not a good thing as a leader to come out. And I've gotten mad at things that have happened, been like, why would they do that? That's stupid. That's not my fault. But then when I actually sit back and think about it and not react and reflect on it and say, how did I create an environment for this to happen?
Yeah.
And I might not be directly responsible, but 2 or 3 degrees removed from that, almost always, because I did something or didn't have something in place or did something there's something I could have done to potentially mitigate that situation. So, um, yeah, that's a hard thing to say because I've always struggled with, well, leaders own everything. It's always your fault because it's like, well, sometimes it's not your fault,
Yeah.
but that's
It's
always
not your
hard to
fault. It's
take.
just your responsibility, right? So you own that,
Yeah,
and you're going to have to
that's
fix it.
that's a great.
I love that you're looking upstream and saying, okay, maybe I wasn't directly, or maybe even indirectly, but I'm tertiary responsible, right? It's a third order effect of something I did or failed to do. Did I not make it clear what right looks like for this employee? Did I not train them
Exactly.
appropriately?
Exactly.
Did I not motivate them in some way, or make it easy for them to get their job done, or resource them correctly? So
Or was
somewhere
I too
along the line,
lax with was I not intentional enough with setting the culture
oh
to
yeah,
where you thought you could just, this was acceptable?
yeah,
Like that
absolutely.
that was a big realization.
Well, the
So,
culture is so it's everything, right? If you have a culture where people meet standards or exceed standards, and that's the norm, then you're going to be great. If you have a
and that was so hard for me to get my head because I'm much more of a numbers guy, and I'm a direct. I'm not a touchy feely. So when I read all the management books in college, and get my MBA, you read all the leadership books. It's like, oh, culture, culture, and I was the person to be like, okay, like, yeah, you need a culture. I understand that because the book says you do, but there's a perfect situation of like, the stove is hot because you can see the flame, but until you touch it and get burned, you don't know. You don't really know it's hot until you get burned. And we had a couple situations that happened where I got burned and then realized like, oh man, culture actually is important and it actually does mean something and that people really do matter and the people are what make it. So that really shifted my mindset in the last 2 years specifically.
That's awesome, and so as a leader, like the growth potential for you is amazing because you've got that base, that mindset that okay, I do own it. The culture matters. I get things done through other people, but it's my responsibility to make sure
Yeah.
that they're prepared for it, they're trained for it, and they understand what right looks like. That's
Try to be a leader who builds leaders so I don't have to lead as much. So,
again, be more lazy, right?
yeah.
Eventually you want the business to run itself without any real input or any significant input from you,
Yep.
and then you can just sit back and do the strategic things that help it grow even more.
Yep. Which has always been my goal.
That's
So,
awesome. um, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for you going forward in growing?
so I think over the last 3 years, we grew really fast in the beginning, and the last 3 years, I don't know if it was inflation, just we kind of go by way of construction. So when construction is flat, we're flat. So as far as like our market and where we're at, construction hasn't gone. A lot of construction has gone backwards, and we've grown, single digits, which is better than a lot of what we're seeing. Um, I would love to get back into that exponential growth phase because, going back 3 years, we're expecting that exponential growth to continue because we were growing double digits year over year. And I would say the biggest challenge we're going to see is one that exponential growth eventually comes because it will come. We're getting into that range now of it's different how you grow because we've always bootstrapped it ourselves.
We've always figured it out. I'd like to hope that we've done enough in preparation over the last 3 years, which I'm confident we have, but you never know until you're tested with it. So I I don't think a challenge is a bad thing necessarily or something I'm scared of. I think it's gonna test us to say, okay, single digit growth is over. What are you gonna do when you get back into those 30% numbers? And do you have those leaders in place? Because we've been developing those leaders, but back in the beginning when we would grow super fast, we almost always struggled with that next level of leadership stepping up, and we would thrust people into positions they weren't ready for, and it would bite us. And when we were smaller, it was easier to kind of fix that. As you get bigger, and instead of one person getting pushed up, it might be three people getting pushed up. Um, that I'm curious to see how we will answer that. I have full confidence we will do well, but it's always kind of that iffy period where like, all right, did we do enough? We'll see. So
Yeah. So what do you do to prepare somebody that you're going to push up as you grow to make sure that they're ready before they get into the position?
yeah, so as I've learned over there, because when I came in, I was a very bad leader. Like I was pretty much like I said, I'm data driven. I'm really good at arguing, and I would beat people into submission, and they would either take my idea because they finally believed it, or they would take it because they didn't want to fight me anymore. And my coach kind of helped me realize that that wasn't a very effective strategy to make people feel good or grow a business. So in everything I've learned, I've really tried to develop pouring into a few people. So, like my COO right now, he's been with me for about 7 or 8 years now, and he started with no experience in the industry, no experience in construction, no experience in management, and I just tried to take that one-on-one approach with him and coach him and pour into him and bring him into what I'm dealing with, and let him test himself, go out on his own and make some decisions. And that's been a longer process with him, but I've been intentionally uh, pouring deep into him so then he can start doing the same with his people. And then, ideally he's building his people, and then I'm still helping out and coming in every once in a while with those people. But I mean, we're making it part. So we run EOS, and we're intentionally we make it part of our rocks to say like, okay, if we're going to grow this much and all that growth is going to come in Q3 and 4, then we need to identify who those guys are now, get them in a developed, and I say developed, but developed training program where, and it's not anything like formal by any means. It's more I think we work best one-on-one coaching and just kind of like talking through things and situations we're going through. And we need to identify those people, identify what we're going to put them through, get them in their Q1, Q2, so then by the time Q3 comes, they're ready to step up. So the last year specifically, we've been doing that, um, giving more responsibilities. Being a small business, sometimes we're forced to pivot and change responsibilities for people. So kind of seeing how people respond to that, and just kind of always watching who's ready for that next level up. So I don't want to say we have like this formal leadership training academy by any means, but I didn't learn a lot in my leadership classes. I don't think so. It's more on the job stuff.
Yeah, there are things that can. So I think the one-on-one coaching that you got has probably been a life changer for you.
Yeah,
And I know many of my clients that's the feedback that I get from them. Like I've never thought about leadership like this, and it's changed the way I
yeah,
interact with people, and it bleeds over into your personal life, right?
yeah.
So I obviously I love it, or I wouldn't be doing it. Um, but I also there's two schools of thought on that in within your company is do you want to bring in somebody from the outside to help people grow individually, or do you want to be the person that does it yourself? And there is an advantage to you being the role model.
And we do a combo. So I never want to force coaching on people because I tried that early, where coaching worked for me, and I'm like, this is great.
Yeah,
So I took one of my top managers, and I was like, you're getting a coach, and he was just not receptive at all, didn't want it, and it wasn't. Or I did that multiple times actually with multiple people, and it's just if they're not open to it, they don't want it, it won't work. So this is why we take that slower approach. And we do it first where we're like, okay, where's your head at? How do you think about things? And then we suggest, okay, why don't you get in this program, or why don't you talk to this person, or go find your own coach, and we'll subsidize it for you. Um, But I've made that a much slower process because I don't want to force anyone into coaching, especially if I'm paying for it and I'm not going to use it. So
Yes. Yeah, and that's I think is a fantastic model, and the advantage of leaders within an organization coaching people is that they're role modeling the behavior, they're reinforcing the company's values, and they're building confidence in the leadership team.
yeah,
Those lower level leaders are like, oh wow, DJ knows some stuff about leadership. Yeah, no wonder he's such a good leader. He knows this stuff, right? And it permeates throughout your whole organization when leaders build leaders. So, man, I really applaud you.
and it
And
helps you be lazy.
yes, yes, absolutely. Um, well, I'm sure that you're thriving now, but as you're tied to the construction cycles. I think, and I'm I'm hoping because I have a construction company as well, that what we're going to see coming out in the next 12 to 24 months is going to be a boon for that industry, and that you're going to ride that wave, and you're going to get back to the level of growth that you have enjoyed
Oh
in the
yeah.
past.
We
You've
get to that 2021, man, that was golden age.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things when you're a part of a major industry and the industry takes a turn, then you're kind of at the whim of that, because it's not like there's going to be a whole lot of other customers outside of construction and
Well, it is. We've been able to break into different industries. So like we've got into demolition, and usually like when there's market turns, construction will boom on private construction will boom on one side, but then uh, DOT work or government work will pick up on the other side. So we got our main start in home building, which as everyone has seen in the past, that can be a volatile
yeah.
industry to hang your hat on. So we've tried to really diversify into as many industries and areas as we can. But being small enough that we can pivot helps us a lot too. So
Awesome. Well, I'm just really impressed with the way that you do business and the way that you lead your people, and I know you're going to be incredibly successful. So, tell me, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is my go-to. I try and get out there as much as possible, and yeah, that's pretty much the only place
Good
I
stuff.
want
We'll
to be
make sure
known.
that your
So
LinkedIn connection is in the show notes so that people can find you and they want to connect with you. Thanks so much for sharing your story and being on the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
well, thank you. Enjoy the conversation.
Awesome. And we'll be back next week with another episode.